When I was reflecting on the reality of the spiritual impact that this quarantine is having on our church and in our lives as believers, as followers of Christ, it's a fun thing to think about. It can be an encouraging thing to think about in some ways, but it can be a sobering thought as well because of the reality that we are isolated from the very community that holds us accountable. We're isolated from our brothers and sisters who hold us accountable to holy living. And that's what we want as followers of Christ. We want to be imitators of Christ. We want to be holy because God is holy. That's what we are called to as Christians. But we're isolated from our church family, and so this can have a negative spiritual impact on us as well. We know our own hearts that we're prone to sin. We're quick to fall back into sins that we have perhaps overcome in the past, or maybe we're still struggling and fighting against. And so I want to encourage you to learn to overcome temptation during this quarantine. Take this time to fight against temptation. Do not give in to the temptations because you have extra time on your hands that you don't know how to fill. Learn to fill that time productively. Learn to train your mind. And so I want to encourage you in that way this morning by giving you three thoughts that I've had as I've thought about this impact that this can have, this quarantine can have on us as Christians. First of all, seek the fellowship of brothers and sisters during this time through whatever medium is available to you. Uh, Train yourself to reach out to others. While we can't meet in person, there's many ways in which we can be reaching out to each other and encouraging each other, holding each other accountable during this time. Be intentional in reaching out to brothers and sisters so that you can continue uh, growing in sanctification during this time. It's very, very important that you learn to do that, that you be intentional in doing that. This quarantine has created an environment with all the extra time that we have. It has created an environment where sin can thrive. We know that sin thrives in secrecy, or when we are in isolation. There's great potential there to fall into temptation and to fall back into sin. And so we have to be intentional in seeking out uh, our brothers and sisters who will hold us accountable in that way. So seek that accountability during this time and be intentional in that. I remembered a verse in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 1. It says, "Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment." And I know that this isolation, because of the quarantine, hasn't been self-imposed, which is what this verse is talking about. But my hope is that we as believers are not are not allowing this time that we have to feed our sinful desires. All of this extra time that we have because of this quarantine, it's an isolation that we've been put in, quite literally. I hope we're using that time to feed our sinful desires or our lustful desires. Whatever the sins that you are most prone to, I hope that you are fighting those intentionally against those in your life by seeking the fellowship of brothers and sisters who uh, maybe it's a small group that's held you accountable in the past, or a couple of brothers in Christ. Reach out to them and stay connected with them and continue growing in sanctification during this time. Secondly, I want to urge you to commit yourself to unceasing prayer. I ran across a quote from Charles Spurgeon, who is famously known as the Prince of Preachers. He said things very well. He said, "Since you are tempted without ceasing, pray without ceasing." And I love that quote because that is so true. We know that reality of how often we are tempted and how much we are tempted um, in so many ways. And so that reality ought to push us to pray without ceasing. The verse that the context that verse comes from is Ephesians 6, where they're speaking of spiritual warfare. And Paul is urging the believers to put on the armor of Christ because this is spiritual battle that we are engaged in. This battle is between you and the enemy of your soul. And if you want to be victorious, you have to pray without ceasing. You must be committed to that. And so, if you want to continue fighting against temptation, realize that that victory will come in part to the one who is committed to praying, to the one who battles in prayer against these temptations and labors with his brothers for the sake of his brothers and praying for them as well. Thirdly and finally, I want to encourage you to live in the victory of Christ, which is promised in 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says this: "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." And that is a tremendous promise. God is promising victory. There's no temptation that has come across your way, that has come to you, that has come into your life, that you are not able to withstand. In the power of Christ, you can overcome that temptation. God has given you everything you need to live a life that is pleasing to him, a life of godliness, a life that pleases him. So understand that, be encouraged by that, and strive to live a life that is pleasing to God. Commit yourself to using this time in fighting in this spiritual battle, fighting against the enemy of our souls, praying for deliverance. Christ even taught us to pray in that way, right? Deliver us from the evil one. And so we must be committed to prayer. We must be committed to seeking the fellowship of brothers and sisters who will hold us accountable. And God promises us this victory. So stand in the power of Christ that has been granted to you to live a victorious life, a life that is pleasing to him in every way.